Hi and welcome back to SDI Coffee Break, where we're still with a very good friend and colleague, Barclay Rae. Hi, Barclay.
Hi, Dave.
Thanks for joining us again. We had a good conversation in the last video about the challenges of where we are right now, especially around, cash flow and stuff like that, as well as different working practices. In this one, I think let's touch upon what it's like to work from home in relation to being motivated. I think certainly there is some sort of changing environment will give you an impetus. I think there will be a different feel from word go. But I think over the next 6 months potentially, if people are still working from home, how are we going to maintain people's motivation to create purpose and meaning? How are we going to reward and recognize people in a completely different way? Now, I don't know if you've thought about that or seen anything, but have you got any ideas maybe on how organizations may start to approach this to give some long-term, mental sustenance, I don't know what you want to call it, to keep an employee engaged when they're working from home?
There's a number of different environments to consider, and obviously if you're somebody who's somebody like me who just has to write stuff occasionally and do videos and stuff from home, it doesn't really matter. The one thing we've done in service desks in particular, there's a real sense of teamwork. There's a real sense of people supporting each other physically, and from a mental health perspective as well. When somebody's on a bad call, when somebody's had a difficult day, their colleagues will support them. They'll come around them, or they'll just give them that additional assurance that they need. That one I think is a very challenging one from the home perspective, and I don't know if in the long term, we have been talking, particularly in ITIL4, we've been talking about service desk as a practice, and it's something that we can virtualize more, we can decentralize. Fine, absolutely. There's lots of things that we can do there in sort of specialized environments in particular. I kind of remain to be convinced that the team service desk isn't still better run physically for a whole number of reasons. Economies of scale, one, obviously, but just simply that human support, I think, is absolutely essential. And it is a tough job. You're getting a lot of negativity, and if you're stuck in your back room getting a lot of negativity, nobody there to help you, that's a challenge. What we are seeing already, and I think it's positive, is where people are using the technology to have not just work type events, so that social events where the team has to gets together and just talks, chats outside of the work environment. In the day, everybody with a beer or coffee or whatever. Even in the kind of ITSM, back to ITSM, we've had a few sort of silly, Zoom meetings where people just chip in, and it's about making sure that you have that social interaction as well. I think additional to that, keeping people interested at home. Well, I think managers will probably be, to earn their money, they will just have to make sure that they are spending their time supporting their people, not beating them with a stick. But and one thing that worries me about having the kind of ACD type technology at home, virtually and so on, is that whole kind of measurement culture is still very much there, but it's there without the context.
Yeah. So
it's there without people going, well, yeah, I know they had a bad, or he was coming in and he bashed his car, or, so that context has got to be maintained, particularly by management and by teams, that they need to know what kind of day people are having. That could be something you can use technology with to, there's all sorts of ways of showing what your mood and status and that sort of thing is, and having the social interaction, I think, helps, because you can, if you have a morning, social kind of coffee thing in the morning, then people can pick up that you maybe haven't had a good night's sleep, or the baby's been crying all night, or that the dog that it's business in the wrong place. You know, all those kind of things just that are there just to just when you know people are not in a great place, that you can help them.
Yeah.
And I think that's things like that will be particularly useful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, that trust thing, it's interesting. You're absolutely right. It's interesting to see how team dynamics are using the technology to try and replicate what they may normally do in or outside work. You know, I've looked at some of the posts, and I'm looking at some of these teams and wondering if this is the closest some of these teams have ever been through this, you know, whether this is a new norm. I think the trust thing you mentioned earlier is really important as well. So, you know, I've seen some brilliant organizations who are very open about listening to their employees, even using color systems. So if somebody comes in and I'm a red today, the organization really understanding quickly why you're red and trying to help, you know. And I think the trust is on both sides. You've got to be, I think you've got to have a culture where you can share that when as a staff member and appreciate that something will happen. So some of the better organizations are going to come to terms with it, I think, a little bit easier than some of the other organizations. Some of the, as you mentioned, that sort of old industrialized Victorian type sort of top-down thing, you know. I'm seeing some and read some very different stories internationally in other parts of the world. I think by the looks of it, the UK as a whole is dealing with this very well and typically supporting their staff. By the looks of it, what I've seen, some brilliant stories out there, Barclay, some brilliant stories. And I've read and listened to colleagues who in other parts of the world, it's not as progressive, you know. It's still very much still very much the old-fashioned sort of approach. And of course, that impacts on people's mental health and well-being. You know, if they're in work, if they're actually in work, dealing with the protecting themselves or away from work, dealing with the new environment.
If you think about, I mean, we were talking previously about, you know, some of the managed service organizations, offshore, nearshore, whatever. You know yourself that many of them have still required a lot of face-to-face management time and cost of travel and dislocation to apply further management to those remote teams, because on their own they're either not delivering or they're not delivering what they think they're delivering, what they've been asked to deliver, but maybe they're not, and they don't have the same level of interaction. So I think it's interesting that the other end of the organizations are now having the same challenge where they're having to work remotely as well, and appreciate that just saying, oh well, in order to save money, we're going to stick this you know, halfway around the world, and it doesn't really matter, does it? Well, it does. You know, there's a cost there. It's not just financial, but it's also social and affects the way people are. You know, I mean, it's not just about we've got the cheapest option and they happen to be wherever in the Philippines or you know, in the Indian subcontinent, wherever. It's the fact that we need something where people are actually working together towards the shared goals. And coming back to your question about value, is, you know, what are we trying to achieve? You know, we're not just here to make up the numbers. We're not just here to, you know, answer the phone. We're here to actually do something that has an outcome. And do we all understand that? Are we all working towards that? That's still the responsibility of leadership to make sure that people understand that and are working together towards that goal.
Yeah, I agree. What's really interesting as well, maybe as we just finish this one, what's interesting, if you look at some of the more progressive thinking around what work means now and what will in the future, people like Rob England, people like Sammy Kent, people like Charles Arajo, who are tapping into sort of new ways of thinking. And these aren't brand new, right? The new ways of thinking about what work means, what the relationship between someone who works in an organization and the organization, what that is, you know. And it's what interests me is, I don't know, and I don't know how you feel, but this may be a catalyst for a longer term change in how organizations are run. This may become the new norm in another 6 months. What do you think about all that, Barclay? And do you think this is going to have a long-term effect on how organizations proposition work?
So the whole nature of work is definitely and has been foreseen for a while. I mean, Charlie Araho has been talking about that for the best part of 10 years.
Yeah.
Quantum age of IT, and we're at the retail phase, and it's different. But it's not just IT; it's all areas of work, I think, and that's. I mean, Rob's more recent work, Agile Manager, and it's about new ways of working. I like that. You know, I've kind of think like a lot of people, the kind of Agile DevOps bubble. There's so many great things in that, but it's becoming a thing that it doesn't need to be. And you know, he and others, and you know, I think a number of us have probably always been a bit cynical about the next thing that comes along. What is it? But actually, there's a lot of good ways of managing and working that have always been, you know, and they tend to have been about how we can do things quickly when we can, effectively when we, you know, when we should, which is most of the time. But sometimes you need to do things slow or different, or you know, the way you manage people is not a mystery. It's just about, you know, being consistent, fair, transparent, you know, as much as you can. So that stuff I think is really useful. I do think though that this whole situation at the moment is you know, and in IT for years we've always talked about, you know, you never get funding to do things until something goes wrong. You know, we've been saying for years, oh, we need to replace that kit because it's end of life, and it's you know, it's a legacy, it's cost. Oh yeah, can you not run it another couple of years, sweat it out? So I think, you know, again, there's a lot where it's not even so much that part of it. It's more about should we change, and I think, you know, the horse is bolted. The stable door, we can try and close it, but every organization must now be looking at, well, why do we need to have these offices? Why do we need to have all these, you know, expensive in centre of London? There are so many new shiny spanking buildings going up still. I don't know who's going to be working in them. You know, it's a bit sad really, but where are the workers going to go in there? Or are they going to be lots and lots and lots of tiny, small organizations that, you know, do need to have a working place where they can meet and do stuff together, and that fulfills that function rather than it being the big corporations, the big head office, all this sort of thing, everything churns. There's a lot to be said for centralization of, you know, certain aspects of how you run a business, because you know, you don't have duplication, you don't have it's all run out of a big building. But even within the buildings, you get, you know, silos and feudal areas and so on. So, but I think just purely from the point of view of why haven't we done more of this before? It does seem to work. You know, we don't need the same amount of you know, football floor space that we've been working on for years. Let's cut it back by 40%. You know, and as long as that's done in tandem with, do we understand the work that people are doing? So, like we said, service desk probably does still need to be in a shared space together. There's other types of work that's like that, I think. Sales is probably another one where people work off each other and so on. But there's other types of work where it doesn't need to be, you know, and as long as we have that exercise that says, this is communal type work and this is individual type work, and let's work to that kind of plan, and actually also then see, what do we need to do, what advantages can we get from the digital aspects of that, the more that we put on. And as an example, I was looking at one of the simulation games the other day, and you know, that where that's being put onto a digital platform, and there's a real, you know, you can look at how you transfer things, so you can transfer bits of work. It's the same with consulting. I'm looking at how to digitize that. So it's not just transferring it onto that platform, it's you have to rethink how you do it so that it works on that platform, and maybe that there's certain advantages of different platforms that you can get that you might not have from the traditional way of doing it. So there's that kind of work the question is how much that will happen in the next 6, 12, 18 months, when people are still recovering from this situation.
Yeah. Yes, thank you for that, Barclay. Do you know what I think, if you look at historically what these types of things have led to, along with, things like the Great Depression and all that negative stuff, there's also really great examples of how innovation has changed. And I think you're right. I think if I was in unified comms right now, I'd be trying to think about what's the next generation platform where organizations are going to invest to work in a real virtual environment. So anyway, thank you very much indeed. We'll close this session now. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for listening, everybody. And we'll see you in the next session. Thank you very much. Thank you.